This is just a narrow line of water, a gap between land masses, barely wider than a city, but in reality, it is one of the most dangerous places on Earth to misunderstand, because through this small strait passes a river of oil, a river that powers economies and moves empires and shakes markets with a single threat. If this water stops, the world feels it immediately. The Strait of Hormuz sits between Iran on one side and Oman and the United Arab Emirates on the other. It is the only sea passage connecting the Persian Gulf to the open ocean. That means every tanker leaving the Gulf has a choice made for it by geography. There is no real alternative route of the same scale. And that is where the story begins. Not with politics, not with war, with land. Because geography is not background here. It is the main character. The strait is narrow. The shipping lanes are tighter still, and the waters around it carry some of the most valuable cargo on the planet. In 2024, oil flow through Hormuz averaged about 20 million barrels per day, roughly 20% of global petroleum liquids consumption. The IEA likewise describes around 20% of today's global oil and LNG supplies as moving through the strait. So the question is simple and unsettling. Why does this small stretch of water hold so much power? Why does the entire world economy still depend on a passage that can be threatened, monitored, or disrupted by a few decisions in one of the most tense regions on Earth? The answer is not just oil, it is not just war, it is leverage. Because the Strait of Hormuz is one of the rare places where geography can be turned into strategy. The strait is only about 35 miles wide at its narrowest point. The broader Persian Gulf it connects to is a closed basin, a deep economic chamber that can only breathe through one opening. That matters because every energy system has bottlenecks. And bottlenecks are where power gathers, not where it is loudest, where it is narrowest. A tanker can cross an ocean, but a tanker in Hormuz is not crossing open water. It is passing through a corridor, and corridors can be watched. Corridors can be blocked. Corridors can be used as pressure points. The obvious question is this: if Hormuz is so vulnerable, why not just build around it? But that is the trap. You cannot easily replace geography with ambition. Oil from Iran, Iraq, Kuwait, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and the United Arab Emirates has long depended on this route, and the strait remains a key corridor for both crude and liquefied natural gas. Shipping lanes are generally situated under international maritime rules, but the physical choke point remains impossible to ignore. Yes, pipelines exist. Yes, some states have tried to reduce dependence, but pipelines do not erase the scale of the sea, and they do not solve the problem completely. This is why Hormuz still matters, not because the world forgot to move on, but because the world never fully could. The Strait of Hormuz became globally infamous during the Iran-Iraq War, especially the period known as the Tanker War in the 1980s. Tankers were attacked. Shipping became a battlefield, and outside powers were pulled in to keep the route open. That moment revealed something important. The strait does not have to be fully closed to create chaos. It only has to feel unsafe, because markets are built not just on flow, but on confidence. And confidence can disappear faster than oil can move. That is the hidden logic of choke points. They work even when they are not physically blocked. The threat alone can change prices, can reroute ships, and trigger panic across continents. The strait is not powerful by itself. Power comes from who lives beside it. Iran sits on its northern shore. That location gives it enormous strategic influence. Not absolute control, but influence. And in geopolitics, influence is often enough. When a state cannot match rivals directly, it often looks for asymmetry. A naval fleet, missiles, mines, fast boats, threats that are cheaper to make than the cost of defending against them. This is the real equation. A weaker actor can sometimes gain strength by making a stronger system fragile, not by defeating it, by raising its price. And this is where the Strait of Hormuz becomes more than a shipping lane. It becomes a theory of world power. Modern civilization likes to imagine that strength comes from size, from armies, from GDP, from population. But Hormuz tells a different story. Sometimes power belongs to the place that can interrupt the system, not the place that built it. That is why choke points matter so much in global politics. They turn ordinary geography into strategic blackmail. They force distant countries in Asia, in Europe, in the United States to care about a narrow strip of water thousands of miles away. Because once trade depends on a single passage, that passage becomes a political actor, not a place, a force. But here is the twist. The Strait of Hormuz is not only about oil leaving the Gulf, it is also about what the world is afraid to admit, that global stability depends on narrow points most people never see. A tanker route, a legal boundary, a naval patrol, a few miles of water. The world's biggest systems are often held together by the smallest seams, and that means the strait is not just a threat, it is a mirror. It reveals how fragile global order really is, when that order depends on one thin corridor between desert shores. In the modern era, Hormuz still matters because energy still matters. Even as the world talks about transition, oil and gas remain central to transport, industry, and state power. The IEA and EIA continue to treat the strait as one of the world's most critical energy choke points, and that means every crisis in the region can echo far beyond it. A threat here can move prices everywhere. It can affect shipping insurance. It can alter military planning. It can influence diplomacy in capitals far from the Gulf. This is why the Strait of Hormuz is not a local issue. It is a global pressure valve. And pressure valves are only noticed when they fail. The Strait of Hormuz is a reminder that history is not always written by the biggest army, or the richest nation, or the loudest leader. Sometimes it is written by a narrow channel of water, by the people who understand its value, and by the world that cannot afford to ignore it. And in the end, it was never just about the strait. It was about who could turn geography into power.